The heat in Needle Creek, Nevada, didn't just sit on you. It tried to eat you. It was a dry, predatory heat that turned the sky into a sheet of hammered brass and made the asphalt shimmer like a lake of oil. By midday, the air felt like it had been filtered through a toaster. My name is Sarah, and I was a proprietor of a little cinder-block sanctuary called the Gilded Cage. It sat right on the edge of the desert, a place where the wind always smelled of sagebrush and desperation. The Gilded Cage wasn't much to look at. It had faded vinyl booths the color of a bruised plum, red checkered tablecloths that had seen better decades, and a kitchen that pumped out enough grease to lubricate a freight train. But 10 years ago, when Rick and I got hitched, it felt like a kingdom. Rick had been a real fireball back then, all quick smiles and high-octane promises. He had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person on God's green earth. But time has a funny way of stripping the chrome off a man. Eventually, you find out what's under the hood, and usually it's just rust and bad wiring. Rick wasn't a man built for the 9 to 5 grind. He had what he called an entrepreneurial spirit, but most folks in Needle Creek just called it being a shyster. It started small, flipping salvage lawnmowers or selling antique clocks that were really just plastic junk from a warehouse in Reno. But as the years pressed down on us, and the bills for the diner started piling up like cordwood, Rick's side hustles took a turn for the pitch black. He started sourcing these knockoff luxury items, bags and watches and shoes, from some greasy contact he had down in Las Vegas. He'd slap on fake labels, stitch in some counterfeit tags, and sell them as the real McCoy to the unsuspecting locals. He ran pop-up shops in the back of his truck, posted listings on Craigslist, and used his brother Javier's name on Facebook Marketplace. Javier lived down in Ensenada and didn't give a hoot what Rick did as long as a wire transfer hit his account once a month. Rick was smart. In that low, cunning way a coyote is smart. He knew that the people buying a Louis Vuitton for $300 new deep down it was a fake, but they wanted to lie more than the truth. When the leather started peeling like a sunburn or the watch hands fell off after a week, they were too ashamed to call the cops. They just ate the loss. It's just the American dream. Sweetheart, Rick would say. He'd sit at the kitchen table late at night, the light of a single bulb casting long, jagged shadows, and he'd count stacks of crumpled 20s. He'd kiss my neck, and for a second, I could almost smell the old Rick, the one who didn't have a heart like a piece of flint. I turned a blind eye because the Gilded Cage was drowning, and Rick's dirty money was the only thing keeping our heads above water. Then came Arnie. Arnie was a man built out of soft edges and bad luck. He started coming into the diner about 2 years ago, always sitting in the corner booth with a paperback book and a bottle of Coors. He was in his late 30s, an IT guy for some firm out in Carson City, and he had a look of permanent loneliness about him. He was tall, slightly stooped, with a boyish grin that fell out of place on a face that was starting to gray. He'd linger over his enchiladas just to talk to me, his eyes following me like a stray dog. "Sarah, these are the best in the state," he'd say, and I could see the neon sign of his crush flashing in the dark of his pupils. I'd flirt back a little, batting my lashes and giving him an extra scoop of salsa. It was harmless, or so I told myself. It kept the registers humming, and it made me feel like something other than a tired waitress in a dying town. But Arnie was too honest for his own good. One Tuesday night, when the diner was empty and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, Arnie leaned over the counter. His face was lit up with a kind of righteous fire. "Sarah, have you heard about these bastards selling the fake designer gear around town?" he asked. "I've been reading about it online. It's a real epidemic. People are getting fleeced." I felt a cold finger of dread trace a line down my spine. I kept wiping the counter, my movements sudden and jerky. "No, Arnie, can't say I have. Why do you care?" "I'm starting a community awareness group," he said, his voice rising with excitement. "I'm going to hold a meeting at the library. Teach people how to spot the fakes. Serial numbers, stitching patterns, the feel of the material. I'm going to put these scammers out of business." My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. Rick had just moved a dozen fake Gucci bags to a group of housewives the week before. I gave Arnie a tight, porcelain smile and changed the subject, but the alarm bells were screaming in my head. That night, I told Rick. I expected him to curse, maybe even pace the floor. Instead, he just laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. He called Arnie a pathetic loser who was just trying to play the hero to get into my pants. But when Arnie's flyers started appearing on every telephone pole in Needle Creek, and the chatter on the local Facebook groups turned sour, Rick's laughter died a quick death. Orders started drying up. People were looking at us sideways when we walked down the street. The paranoia set in like a rot. That four-eyed son of a bitch is ruining me. Rick growled one night in the back of the kitchen. The smell of old fryer oil was thick enough to choke on. He thinks if he plays the white knight, you'll fall for him. I rolled my eyes, though my hands were shaking. What do you want, Rick? He's just a lonely guy. No, Rick said, his eyes turning into dark, bottomless pits. We flipped the script. Next time he comes in, you make a scene. You tell everyone he's been touching you, whispering filth, making you feel unsafe. I'll be waiting. We break his reputation, and nobody listens to a word he says about the business. It was a crazy plan. The kind born out of cornered mind, but the gilded cage was on life support, and Rick was getting desperate. So, the next time Arnie came in, I played my part. When he tried to tell me about his library meeting, I pulled back like he'd burned me. I raised my voice until every head in the diner turned. I told you to stop, Arnie. I shouted, my voice cracking with a fake tremor. I don't care what you want to do to me. Just leave me alone. Arnie's face went white. He looked like I'd slapped him with a wet fish. Sarah? I didn't mean, I was just... Get out. I screamed. Get out before I call the cops. He fled the diner, his face a mass of confusion and hurt. I texted Rick one word. Now. I knew Arnie would come back to the alleyway behind the diner to try and explain himself. He was that kind of man, the kind who couldn't stand a misunderstanding. Around midnight, I heard the scuff of boots on the gravel. I stepped out the back door, pretending to toss a bag of trash. Arnie was standing there in the shadows, looking like a ghost. Sarah, please, he whispered. I don't know what happened in there. I would never hurt you. I know about Rick, Sarah. I know what he's doing, and I just wanted to help you. Rick exploded from behind a stack of crates. He was a blur of violence, a hurricane of shadow and rage. He grabbed Arnie by the throat and slammed him against a brick wall, with a sound like a wet sack of flour hitting the pavement. Arnie gasped, his glasses flying off and shattering on the concrete. You think you can talk to my wife like that? Rick roared. You think you can ruin my life? Rick's fist connected with Arnie's jaw, a sickening crunch that echoed in the narrow space. Arnie slumped, but Rick wasn't done. He snatched a heavy cleaning hose from the wall, the one we used to spray down the grease traps. It was still dripping with a harsh, caustic bleach solution. He looped it around Arnie's neck and pulled. The air in the alley turned sharp and acrid with the smell of chemicals. Arnie's eyes went wide, his tongue protruding as his face turned a bruised shade of violet. He clawed at the hose, his legs kicking out in a frantic, dying dance. Please, Sarah, help me, he gurgled, his voice a broken whistle. I froze. My heart felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. This wasn't the plan. We were supposed to scare him, not snuff him out like a candle. But Rick was gone, lost in a red mist of fury. He looked like an animal, his teeth bared and his eyes bulging. Rick, stop! I screamed, grabbing his arm. You're going to kill him. Rick hesitated for a split second, the red light fading from his eyes just enough for the grip to slacken. Arnie twisted free, falling to his knees and vomiting onto the gravel. He scrambled up, his breath coming in ragged, sobbing gulps, and he ran. He disappeared into the darkness of the desert, his screams fading into the wind. He never came back. He quit his job, packed his bags, and vanished from Needle Creek like he'd never existed. Maybe it was a fear, or maybe it was a realization that the woman he loved was just as rotten as the man he was trying to expose. Life went on. The whispers died down. Rick found a new supplier and started using even more aliases. I kept serving plates at the Gilded Cage, smiling at the customers and pretending my heart hadn't turned into a cold stone. We are survivors, Rick and I. In a place like this, you do what you have to do to keep the heat from killing you. But sometimes when I'm locking up at night and the desert wind begins to howl, I think I can hear a soft, rhythmic scratching at the back door. I think of Arnie and the look in his eyes when the hose tightened. We survived, sure, but sometimes I wonder if the thing that's still walking around in my skin is actually me at all. So here's the question for you. If you were in my place, would you have stepped in or let it happen protect everything you built? I arrived in Portland with the sort of bright-eyed optimism that usually gets a man killed in a horror movie. I was 28, a software engineer with a shiny new contract and a desperate need for a change of scenery. I had traded the gray, boxy canyons of New Jersey for the lush, moss-covered rain of the Pacific Northwest, thinking that the air would be cleaner and the people would be kinder. I spent my first 3 weeks in a high-rise apartment that overlooked the Willamette River, watching the fog roll in like a slow-motion tidal wave. It was beautiful, sure, but it was lonely as a tomb. My life was a series of glowing screens, Slack notifications, and the hollow hum of the air conditioner. By the end of the month, the silence in my living room had started to grow teeth. I did what every other lonely soul in the digital age does. I downloaded an app. I swiped through faces like I was browsing a catalog for a life I didn't have. Most were forgettable, just blurred selfies and hollow bios about liking hiking and craft IPAs. Then there was Clara. She had a smile that looked like it belonged in a toothpaste commercial, framed by dark, chestnut hair and a dusting of freckles across her nose that seemed to spell out a secret code. Her photos showed her standing in front of Multnomah Falls or cradling a mug of steaming coffee in some wood-paneled shop in the Pearl District. We matched. The conversation was easy, flowing like good bourbon. She told me she had grown up in the shadow of Mount Hood, and that Portland was a city for dreamers and runaways. You have to let me show you the real Oregon. She messaged me on a Tuesday evening when the rain was drumming a relentless beat against my window. Not the tourist traps. The places where the world feels big and you feel small. Dinner first? I didn't even hesitate. I was tired of being a ghost of my own life. We met at a place called the Rusty Anchor, a dim, cozy joint where the air smelled of salt and cedar. Clara was exactly as she appeared in her photos, only more vivid. She wore a flannel shirt over a pair of worn Levi's, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked effortlessly northwest, like she had been carved out of a piece of old-growth fur. "Hey, stranger," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and rain. "I hope you're ready for the best salmon of your life. It's better than that frozen junk they serve back east." Dinner was a dream. We talked about my transition to the tech scene, the way the Oregon humidity made my hair go wild, and how the hills around the city felt like they were watching you. She laughed easily, a deep musical sound that made me feel like the most interesting man in the room. She told me about her ex, a guy who had spent more time with his PlayStation than with her, and how she had almost given up on the whole dating scene. "People are strange creatures, Elias," she said, her green eyes locking onto mine over the rim of her glass. "But you seem like the genuine article, a rare find in the wild." I felt a flush of pride. After we split the bill, she led me to her car, a battered green Subaru Forester that was covered in bumper stickers for national forests and local radio stations. "Trust me on this," she said, sliding into the driver's seat. "Larch Mountain at night is something you never forget. The stars up there look like they're close enough to touch." The city lights began to thin as we climbed. The road was a twisting ribbon of black, flanked by towering Douglas firs that seemed to lean in, whispering to one another as we passed. Clara turned on a playlist of low, mournful folk music, the kind of songs that feel like they were written in a basement during a blizzard. "Do you ever think about how easy it would be to just disappear out here?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was light, but there was an edge to it, like one wrong turn, and you're just part of the forest floor. No one would find you for years. I gave a nervous chuckle, adjusting my seatbelt. "Nature is humbling," I said. "It makes you realize we're just ants on a very big hill." We pulled into a gravel overlook. There wasn't another soul in sight. The moon was a pale, bloated eye hanging in the sky, casting a silver sheen over the valley below. The air was cold, the kind of cold that gets right into your marrow. "Come on," she said, grabbing my hand. Her skin was surprisingly warm. "There's a bench just down the trail." It's got the best view in the county. We walked in silence, our footsteps crunching on the wet needles and stones. The woods were a wall of shadow, alive with the rustle of hidden things. We reached a weathered wooden bench that looked out over a deep, dark gorge. It was beautiful, but it was also terrifying. The isolation was a physical weight. We sat down, our shoulders touching. For a long time, we just stared at the stars. "I love the quiet," Clara whispered. "It's the only time you can really hear yourself think. No one to interrupt. No one to hear you if you decide to scream your lungs out." I turned to her, expecting a smirk, a wink, some sign that she was joking. But she was staring straight ahead, her face as still as a tombstone. After a beat, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Kidding," she said. "Mostly." She shifted the conversation to the dark history of the area. She talked about the way the woods can change a person. Then she brought up the monsters that walk among us. "Are you a fan of true crime, Elias?" she asked. "I'm obsessed with the ones who could blend in, the ones like Ted Bundy. He lived right around here for a while, you know? He had that charm, that way of making women feel safe." Then, click, the trap closes. I shifted uncomfortably. I've listened to a few podcasts, I admitted, but it's a bit heavy for a first date, don't you think? Her eyes lit up, gleaming in the moonlight like marbles. "I wonder what it feels like," she said, "to just snap, to decide that the rules don't apply to you anymore. I wonder if I could do it. The perfect crime. No traces, no evidence. Just a cold, hard act. A cold knot tied itself in my stomach. You're scaring me a little. Clara, is this part of the Portland charm?" She burst into a laugh then, but it wasn't the musical sound from the restaurant. It was a high, jagged cackle that echoed off the trees, sounding like a bird being strangled. It was a sound that didn't belong to a sane person. "Oh, Elias, lighten up," she said, grabbing my arm with a grip that was shockingly firm. "Everyone has these thoughts. Don't tell me you've never wondered what it's like to cross the line." "Not really," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm a pretty standard guy." She leaned in close, her breath smelling of the peppermint she'd had after dinner. "You're so cute when you're terrified. I can feel your heart jumping through your shirt. I want us to remember this night. I want us to be marked." She reached into the side of her boot and pulled out a small silver switchblade. The sound of it clicking open was the loudest thing in the world. "Clara, put that away," I said, my hands coming up in a defensive gesture. "This isn't funny." She didn't listen. She pressed the tip of the blade against her own thigh, right above her knee. Her eyes never left mine as she slowly, deliberately, began to carve into her skin. I watched in horror as a thin line of crimson bloomed against the pale moonlight. She didn't flinch. She smiled as she carved a jaggedy for my name. "Elias, now you," she whispered, her voice a low, husky rasp. "You mark me, or I mark you. It's a blood pact." The smell of copper hit me, mixing with the scent of damp pine. It was the smell of madness. My survival instinct, the one that had been dormant for years in my cubicle, finally screamed at me to move. I didn't say another word. I didn't try to reason with her. I just bolted. I ran down that trail like the devil himself was snapping at my heels. I could hear her laughing behind me, that terrible, echoing cackle that seemed to come from the trees themselves. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the road, my lungs burning, my heart a frantic drum in my chest. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of a lonely shell station at the bottom of the mountain. I burst inside, gasping for air, looking like a lunatic. The clerk, a man with a face like a dried prune, looked up from his newspaper. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son," he said. "I need a phone," I wheezed. "I need the police." I told him everything. The app, the bison burgers, the drive, the knife. They drove me back up the mountain, but the green Subaru was gone. There was nothing at the overlook but a few drops of blood on the gravel that the rain was already washing away. They took a report, but they told me there wasn't much they could do if she didn't want to be found. I blocked her on everything. I changed my number. I moved to a different apartment 2 weeks later, one with more neighbors and better locks. But I still don't sleep well. Every time I hear a Subaru engine or a woman's high-pitched laugh, my skin crawls. I checked the app again weeks later under a fake name. Her profile was gone, like it had never existed. Sometimes I wonder if she's still out there, sitting on that bench, waiting for the next Elias to show her the stars. Sometimes I wonder if she's watching me right now. The heat in Savannah, that July didn't just sit on you. It owned you. It was a thick, wet wool blanket draped over the city, smelling of river mud, jasmine, and the slow rot of old money. It was the kind of humidity that made the mosquitoes sluggish and the people mean. I spent most of my evenings in my third-floor apartment, listening to the rhythmic thrum of a window unit that sounded like a blender full of marbles, wondering why I had moved south in the first place. My name is Elena, and that summer, I was 29 years old and dangerously bored. When you are lonely in a city that feels like a beautiful graveyard, you turn to the blue light of your phone. I had matched with Mara on Bumble on a Tuesday when the heat index hit 105. Her profile was a curated collection of a life I wanted to lead. Hiking in the Smokies, blurred photos of indie rock concerts, and a quote from Shirley Jackson that made my literary heart skip a beat. She looked like trouble in the best way possible. We spent a week batting messages back and forth like a tennis match. We traded stories about our worst Tinder disasters and the dive bars where floorboards were permanently tacky with spilled Pabst. She was a freelance graphic designer for underground bands, a job that sounded infinitely more romantic than my position as a junior analyst at a mid-sized marketing firm where my primary duty was making spreadsheets look less like death warrants. Eventually, the digital tether wasn't enough. We agreed to meet at Lorenzo's, a hole-in-the-wall Italian joint on the edge of the historic district. It was the kind of place that had been there since the Truman administration, featuring red checkered tablecloths, candles stuck in old Chianti bottles, and a smell of garlic so potent it could ward off vampires for a 3-block radius. I arrived 10 minutes early, my nerves doing a frantic little dance in my stomach. I had squeezed into my favorite black dress, the one that made me feel like a noir protagonist, and I was nursing a glass of cheap Pinot Grigio when she walked in. Mara was a knockout in a way that felt effortless and slightly predatory. She was in her mid-30s, with short, raven hair that looked like she cut it herself with a pair of kitchen shears. She had a sleeve of tattoos, mostly geometric patterns and botanical sketches, and a grin that seemed to say she knew exactly what I was thinking. "Hi, you must be Elena," she said, sliding into the booth. The air around her smelled like sandalwood and cloves. I managed a smile, though my throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "That's me. You found the place without a GPS?" She laughed, a low, resonant sound that vibrated in the wood of the table. Traffic on Broughton was a nightmare, but I'd walked through a swamp to get to this tiramisu. "You look incredible, by the way." We ordered a mountain of bruschetta and calamari, and for the first hour, the conversation was like a well-rehearsed play. She talked about the chaos of the freelance world, the eccentric lead singers she'd had to deal with, and the freedom of being her own boss. I told her about the soul-crushing monotony of the corporate world, the endless meetings that could have been emails, and the way my life felt like it was being lived in 12-point Arial font. "I hate the hive mind," she said, dipping a piece of bread into a pool of balsamic vinegar. "It's like everyone is just waiting for permission to exist. I quit my firm last year. I decided I'd rather be broke and wild than rich and bored." I felt a surge of admiration. "What about the dating scene?" I asked. "Any legendary disasters?" Mara leaned back, her dark eyes sparkling. "Oh, honey," pull up a chair. "I once went out with a woman who had a literal shrine to her dead cat in her dining room. I'm talking candles, photos, and a small urn shaped like a ball of yarn. It was some serious Pet Cemetery energy. I nearly choked on my wine. No way. That beats my guy who brought his mother. She didn't sit at the table, but she sat at the bar the whole time, watching us like a hawk. We laughed until my ribs ached. She had a dark, jagged sense of humor that fit mine like a key in a lock. We moved from dating stories to true crime, discussing the latest podcasts and the unsettling statistics of how many people simply vanish into the ether every year. "You ever think about how easy it would be?" she asked, her voice dropping a half octave. "To just erase someone?" No fingerprints, no trail, just a person-shaped hole in the world? I chuckled, though a small, cold wind seemed to blow through the warm restaurant. All the time, I blamed too much Dateline and not enough sleep. By the time the bill came, I was 3 glasses in and feeling a warm, hazy glow of optimism. This was the spark I'd been looking for. She insisted on driving me back to my apartment since she lived just a few blocks past me, and I didn't put up a fight. The thought of a $20 Uber ride in a car that smelled like old fries didn't appeal to me when I could ride in Mara's old Jeep. The Jeep was a relic from the 90s. The seats worn down to the foam and the interior smelling of stale American Spirit cigarettes. As she pulled onto the dark, tree-lined streets where the Spanish moss hung like tattered ghosts, the atmosphere in the car shifted. It was like a dimmer switch being slowly turned down. Mara's playful grin had turned into a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know," she said, her voice cutting through the soft hum of the engine. "You're my car now. My territory. I could drive you out to the salt marshes, and nobody would hear from you for a decade. You're basically my prisoner." I laughed, though it sounded a bit thin in the cramped space of the Jeep. "Well, if you're planning a kidnapping, I hope you have good snacks. I'm a very high-maintenance hostage." She didn't laugh back. She reached over and clicked the child safety locks on the doors. The sound was a sharp, metallic snap that felt like a bolt being slid into place. "I'm serious, Elena. The doors are locked. We're out here in the moss in the dark. I could take a left turn right now toward a cabin I know in the woods, and you'd just be another missing person report by Monday morning." "Okay, Hannibal Lecter. Let's dial it back a notch," I teased, but my heart had started to thud against my ribs like a trapped bird. The radio was playing a soft, melodic pop song, which made the conversation feel even more surreal. She kept going, her voice low and rhythmic. "Imagine it. You tied up in the back, realizing that your whole life, your spreadsheets, your black dress, your tiny apartment, it all belongs to me now. I'd make you my little pet. I'd teach you how to be quiet." My laugh faltered completely. "Mara, that's getting a little intense. I think I'm ready to head home now." "Come on, Elena. You said you liked the dark stuff. Don't tell me you're a little mouse after all." Her voice had a sharp, jagged edge to it now, like a piece of broken glass. She reached over and squeezed my knee. Her grip was far too tight, her fingers digging into my muscle until it hurt. "What if I don't take you home? What if we just drive until the gas runs out? What if I decide you're exactly what I've been looking for to fill that hole in the world?" I shifted in my seat, staring out at the passing streetlights, praying for a police car or even a late-night jogger. Yeah, hilarious. But seriously, my apartment is right after this next light. Mara ignored me. She didn't even slow down. Prisoners don't get to choose the route. Elena, they get what I give them. Maybe I should pull over in that dark stretch by the cemetery. Make you prove you're worth keeping. "Stop the car," I said, my voice rising. "This stopped being funny 3 minutes ago. Stop the car right now." "Oh, we're touchy," she said, but she didn't stop talking. She started rambling about control, about the nature of power, and how women like me needed to be broken down before they could be truly understood. My gut was screaming at me, a high-pitched siren of red flags. I felt like a fool for getting into a stranger's car, for letting a pretty face and a few edgy jokes blind me to the predator underneath. Finally, she swerved toward the curb in front of my building. She braked so hard that I lurched forward against the seatbelt. "There you go, little prisoner," she said, winking at me in the glow of the dashboard lights. "For now, consider this a stay of execution." I didn't wait for another word. I fumbled with the lock, which she finally released with a mocking click. I bolted out of that Jeep, my heels clicking frantically on the pavement. I didn't look back until I was through the heavy iron gates of my building and had locked the deadbolt on my apartment door. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I messaged my best friend, "Weirdest, scariest date of my life. Call me as soon as you wake up." I blocked Mara's number. I deleted the Bumble conversation. I even reported her profile, though I doubted the moderators would do much about a woman who made creepy jokes. She called me twice the next morning from a private number, but I let them go to voicemail. There was no message, just the sound of someone breathing and the faint, distant hum of a folk song. Looking back, I know I caught a glimpse of something truly broken that night. Some people don't just like dark humor. They use it as a veil for a darkness that is very, very real. I survived a humid summer in Savannah, but I never go on a first date without my own set of keys and a clear path to the exit. If you were trapped in a car with someone who began to describe your own kidnapping in vivid detail, would you try to play along to keep the peace, or would you risk everything to jump out while the wheels were still turning?